going to continue on this line, and I think you've eloquently put a lot of things that I've been thinking about and writing notes about, so thank you for that. I also want to thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to be here on their unceded territories, and especially for being conscious stewards of the land and the waters for generations, which is exactly what we need to learn at this time of ecological crisis, which is exactly what we're here to do and talk about. So when I was approached with this theme, and it's so massive and there's so many things to touch on, and I didn't really know where to begin, and I kind of defaulted back to a lot of the exciting discourse around the Occupy movements around the world. And one of the things I kept falling back on was this notion that often the mainstream media critique of, well, what is the message? What is the big message? And which seems so obvious in so many ways. But I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I was thinking that, to me, in some ways, which relates very much to the topic of ecology and systemic change and sustainability, which is that, to me, the Occupy movement is essentially an anti-war movement. In the way I see it, it's against market fundamentalist war against life. It's against community. It's a war that is essentially against ecology, against justice, against human rights. It's a war against the commons. To me, that encapsulates my understanding of what people are speaking out against and acting against right now, and proposing alternatives for. And so that's what's exciting about the conversations and actions happening today around with the indignados and the occupiers and the resistors and the revolutionaries that have been working not just in this phase, but for many phases against this war on the commons. That we must oppose this war on life and establish new modes of being and relationship, which are often rooted in very old knowledge and understanding that we need to remember. I've been working in collaboration with a close friend on a project, a film project essentially, but it's sort of morphing into other things, that looks at, and my friend who is an ecological economist, we've been trying to track this idea of unlimited growth and this very destructive and insane, psychotic concept of unlimited growth within a world that has limits. The finite reality of this world and its systems and its ecological closed-loop systems having no relationship to this idea, this economic notion that we must grow, okay? And how frightening it is that the discourse within the superstructure of policy and governance is still rooted in this idea of unlimited growth, that GDP must continue to rise, even though it has no relationship to reality or the consequences, or will take any accountability for the consequences it engenders in the process of destruction. And interestingly, about 10 years ago, when we started thinking about this and proposing it as a notion or an idea to deconstruct and unpack, it was interesting. A lot of people responded kind of going, well, what else is there? What else could be a replacement for the GDP? Or why would you want to question growth? And definitely in the mainstream media, very rarely would you ever hear anything or critique around growth. But interestingly, especially in the last year or so, I've noticed that the discussion around economics is always coming back to this. It's like the big elephant in the room. Can we talk about sustainability? Can we talk about an ecological consciousness? Can we talk about all the injustices that we're facing without dealing with the system that is predicated on something that is completely insane? So I just wanted to show a very short clip of a beginning of this project, and then kind of continue and go on to where we headed with this idea. So the first part of this project was really just to tackle this idea, deconstruct it, and present it as a question. If this is impossible, then what else is there? What are the other possibilities that have existed and that we can reclaim and that we can actually reformulate in the future? That's good.
Throughout most of human history, both the population and the economy grew extremely slowly. Beginning in the middle of the 18th century, population growth began to pick up. With the Industrial Revolution beginning in the 1820s, the economy began to grow as well. As we entered the fossil fuel age, cheap energy from coal and then from oil multiplied the energy available per person by 5 and then by 12 times. Suddenly, we had the power to transform the world as never before. However, the 20th century eclipsed everything that came before. In the last 100 years, the world's population has quadrupled. Industrial output has grown 40 times. The global economy has expanded 16-fold. Fish catch 35 times. CO2 emissions increased 13 times, while the blue whale population decreased 99.75%. At an average growth rate of 3%, the size of the economy doubles every 23 years. Double the resources, double the cars, double the emissions.
2009 began with a sinking global economy paralyzed by a worldwide credit crunch, bank failures, and investor panic from Wall Street to Tokyo.
Could Europe go into economic meltdown?
That is a very scary world.
The United States is not expected to drive global economic growth.
A bad situation could become dramatically worse.
Some are beginning to suggest that the global financial crisis may be receding.
A huge surge in jobs is being predicted in 2010 as the economy bounces back from the financial crisis.
We have gone to economic war, and the euro won't survive that economic war.
A bad situation could become dramatically worse.
This is not just a financial crisis, it's also a crisis of poverty and inequality, energy, water. In addition to the poverty, inequality, social crisis, the ecological crisis is the most serious one.
If what we have had is not sustainable, let's stop moving in the same direction. Let's change our direction.
I think the current crisis is providing us with an opportunity to rethink what we think an economy is for, what we want from an economy, and whether we can find a better way to design our economy.
Is anybody talking about less growth?
To a number of people, whether academics, economists, politicians, activists, people in their communities, what we found was that, obviously the answer to that question was that there is definitely still, and remains, the 1% of the answer, the 1%'s answer, which is there is no alternative. That there is no answer to the question of what can replace the idea of GDP or economic growth, or to replace the system which is so inherently flawed at so many levels. But what I am arguing, and what we are finding as we've continued this project, is that there are many answers. And I think that one of the problems that have come up is that there have been the critique has been, well, there has to be one thing to replace this system. Which, when we go back to the idea of ecology and what you were so eloquently saying before, is that in ecological systems, you need biodiversity for a healthy system. You need many processes working together in a closed loop system to create a healthy ecology. And I would argue, and as we found, there are many answers, there are many alternatives. We need them all. We need the answers to make sense to the communities that are actually implementing them. We need the answers to be interrelated. We need people to know about them. But there is no one dominant model that can supplant this model. To think that is thinking in a monolithic way. That is very much part of the problem, I think. So as I said before, we were kind of going on this process, and then we decided, well, part of the problem is that people often kind of get overwhelmed with these big pictures, and when we talk about the resource extraction that's going on, and you know, all of the many things that we're facing in terms of big oil, big mining, big hydroelectric projects that are wreaking havoc on the earth. What we need to be reminded of is that there are alternatives in action that are happening right now, that people are actually engaging in communities all around the world. Some of these are very old, some of these are very new, but what's happening and what we've sensed is that there's an intensification of interest in what these could be. So I'm going to show you another clip from the second phase of the continuation of this project that we're undertaking, which is basically to try and document as many of these responses, these actions that people are taking, to basically redesign their economies in a way that fits within this ecological paradigm, where these are understandings that economics, as the root being oikos, is about taking care of your home. Ecology is home. So how do we redesign our systems in such a way that we can actually work within what we have? See limits not as something as a negative or obstructions, but limits actually offer us opportunities, right? And we must take into account those limits. So I'll show the second piece that sort of opens up that discussion. And what's been exciting is that as we've been delving into this, you know, exploration, it's become very clear that there's no possible way we could make a film that's nothing less than a week long to try and document all the things that are going on. So what we tried to do was sort of break it down into areas of economy and sort of demonstrate that there's many different possibilities that people can engage with, which I think is very exciting. And that these things start at the grassroots, right? These things can be seen as very small initiatives, but when you look at them in totality, they become a landscape of change that is very much speaking to this wider desire to create something new. So I'll just show this piece.
People are starting to realize that they're not going to be able to accumulate money, and just sort of looking around at this world and saying, well, then what do I want society to be like?
People from all different walks of life are starting to consider a new way of running the economy, and I guess there's very different ways of doing it, but there are certain themes that tend to underlie it. They want it to be democratic and egalitarian, where they're getting out what they're putting in. They want more participation. They want to be active in their economic life and feel like they're contributing something valuable to the community.
Just in the last 3 years, and I think it has a lot to do with the economic crisis, there's just so much happening. I can't keep up with it. I've just sort of given up on any attempt to keep up with all the exciting things happening in the new economy. But that's what's wonderful about it, is it really does feel like a revolution happening.
You can work with 1 day a week and get by if you live simple.
Is there anything that you would motivate you to get in the car? No.
How would I define the sharing economy? It's a collection of practices that are more collaborative, more sharing, less competitive, and happening at local community levels. They're very grassroots driven.
I don't feel that I should be part of corporate and shareholder dividend. I want to know that I'm doing something for my community, and I don't always feel that the way that I thought before, just buying for, without thinking, that was the right way to go.
I think part of the future possible economy that I can see really working and being great relative to this one, is where people can share skills.
We're at the Tool Lending Library, part of the Burnaby Public Library, and we've been here for 32 years.
A lot of people just get into it because it saves a lot of overhead, and plus it's cheap. We're your garage. It's a great concept. But we find a lot of people now are asking for packages from us on how to start their own tool library, and they just started one in Boulder, Colorado.
We're here at the Free Farm in San Francisco. We're trying to move towards a model that is thinking outside of economies and thinking of ways that we can recreate relationships between people that is based on trust.
This was once a church, a beautiful church that burned down, and sort of from the ashes of that, this beautiful garden, came to be. That feeds people, and it doesn't cost anything.
It's tracking, there's stories there that actually since we started, like for example the tool library, there's one here now, there are many of them. The idea of local currencies that we were tracking, we've seen it proliferating quite a bit in the last few years. The Transition Town movement, which has been instrumental in a lot of these things, has been flourishing in a lot of places. The idea of free cycle, free markets, there's one today happening at Robinson Square. I think the Occupy group has been working with that. So these are things, as I said before, that are kind of these points of light, but when looked at together, you see them as offering spaces that are very much a reclaiming of the commons. They're very much a reclaiming of our right to be able to exist, that often have initially an intention of kind of working with the crisis of trying to find other ways of maintaining ourselves and our communities, but often have these spin-off effects. And that's the other thing that we've been really excited to find as we explore these, that what initially started as perhaps like a way of pooling resources or trying to deal with economic downturn has ended up having all of these associated benefits around bringing communities together, creating space for dialogue, revitalizing ecology, having conversations that look at what do we want to envision, how do we take this to the next level, how do we connect with other places. And so just to wrap up and end, I think we could go on and talk about these things, but I think one of the things that I actually feel is really key in terms of revisioning an ecological, a new economic ecological reality is to understand, to really learn about our histories, to learn about the movements that have come before us as well, to share that knowledge. And as was just stated at the end there, to really learn and understand the colonization process and the need to keep going and working towards a decolonization process, and working as allies and in solidarity with especially the First Nations and all the people who have been most impacted by the colonization processes that have led to this kind of insanity of unlimited growth on a finite planet. And it seems to be happening in many ways. So as biodiversity, it creates the healthy ecosystems we want to live in. The biodiversity of tactics and strategies of perspectives is also going to create healthy alternatives to this ecological crisis too. Thank you.